Right, well, hello everyone. I'm David Smith, DVL Smith, and I'm going to talk to you about how to construct an evidence-based customer insight story, hopefully building on all the excellent advice that you've had already. So, it's fine. We've been teaching storytelling for many years, and in my experience, when a lot of market researchers hear the word storytelling, some of them want to scream, and the reason for that is that they want to say, look, I'm not a Hollywood film director, I'm not a dramatist, I'm not a novelist, I'm a data-based analyst. So how does the world of storytelling fit in with what I do? So kind of in response to that, we've tried to break down the whole storytelling art and craft into a number of specific tools to make it more accessible, so people are not faced with a massive task of how do I create a story, but can break it down and look at different elements. And that's what I'm going to do in our 15 minutes together. I'm going to work through each of the 7 tools that you see here on the screen, so you're going to get an account of each of the different things on the screen there, how to understand the audience, have a clear sense of purpose, reduce the evidence down to the killer data, have a clear, succinct message, have that structure that is so important to driving a narrative, how to theme and use words carefully, and how to bring everything alive in an impactful way. So that's my storytelling mission. So if we just kicked off with the first storytelling tool, which is the audience tool. Now, just very briefly, when I talk about story tool, what I mean here in the toolkit is, having a set of principles, a number of concrete actions you can follow, frequently asked questions answered for you, templates, best next move. So it's not just sort of a general abstract account of this, it's actually pinning it down into concrete steps. So when it comes to the first tool, the audience tool, I mean, this is pretty basic stuff. It's easy to assume that you know what your audience wants. But, in my experience, and I've been doing this for a number of years, you can still actually be wrong. So let me give you a quick example. I was once doing a project for a publisher. They asked me to evaluate a competitor's publications. I did the research project. The competitor did much, much better than my client organization. I turned up and gave the presentation rather apprehensively, wondering what the reaction would be. And to my surprise, they sort of all stood up and applauded, not me, but the outcome, i.e. the competitor was doing well. Why? Well, because they just bought the company a few days before, and they were absolutely ecstatic with the results. But I never actually knew that. And so if I'd have asked one of the questions in the audience toolkit, which is on completion of this project, what do you expect to be able to do with the findings, I would have been in a much better position. And I should say that's not the only question in the toolkit, but just to give you a sort of high level illustration. So let's move on to the second storytelling tool, which is the purpose tool. Now, this is less obvious. In all the years I've been teaching storytelling, it surprises me that a number of people, when you ask them, what is it that you want to achieve by giving this presentation? What change do you want to bring about in the audience by talking to them? They don't have that in their head. They sort of shuffle into the presentation, and obviously they've got to answer the business question, the research objectives, but they haven't actually crystallized in their own mind the answer to the question on the screen there. What change in behavior do you want to bring about by giving this presentation? And it is absolutely crucial to have that underpinning what it is you're doing. So let me give you an example of this. I do a lot of work for universities, and in the UK at least, maybe worldwide, we're entering a new education paradigm. There's just so much change. It's telling anyone that's in the education and university game that you just can't stand still. There's an avalanche of change coming your way, and what have you got to do if an avalanche is coming? Move, get out of the way, do something. And so whatever the particular project is I'm doing for the university, I've got a clear idea that my purpose is trying to encourage them not to stand still, but to be radical and to change, basically. Right, next tool, the evidence story tool. Which again is we've learned a lot of this afternoon. We clearly need to focus down on that sort of 20% of evidence that's driving, 80% of the storyline, and it's sort of picking up on some of the points that Lucy and Lauren were making about thinking about the audience, about are they type A, B, or C audience, and just what information do we need to win their hearts and minds. So the evidence tool is important, and you need to be thinking about how you not only win the intellectual argument, but how you actually respond to the way they feel about a particular issue, and encourage them to be involved and to share your message. Now, the management consultants, of course, understand this for years. I think a lot of us market researchers were kind of slightly irritated by doing a major project and then presenting all our data, only to find the management consultants turned it into a little 2x2 and won plaudits for doing that. But the point is that they understood one fundamental thing, which is it's all about turning data-centric problems into intuitive visual solutions. So once you've sort of grasped that point, picking up what we've just learned in the presentations from this afternoon, that you've got to actually think visually. So the example I've got here is, let's say you had a complicated study about who to recruit into an organization, and you've got all sorts of tests about whether people did well on a test about whether they could simplify problems or whether they were confusers. You've got other data about whether they were great team players and energy radiators, or whether they were energy sappers and couldn't work in a team. Rather than present all that complicated data, you put up your 2x2 and you're immediately saying to people, what this organization needs are energy radiators who simplify problems. Whatever you do, don't employ energy drains and sappers who confuse the hell out of everything. So very visually, you've got to the heart of the point you want to make. The next tool is the message tool. And to describe the message tool, it really is, what would the audience say after a presentation? You've given a presentation and someone who wasn't there said, what was that about? What was David Smith talking about there? You need to come back in one sentence to explain exactly what was happening in that presentation. And I think us market researchers tend to think, well, it's all very complicated, we couldn't pin it down to one sentence. I think we've got to get over that and learn that we should be able to reduce things down and summarize things to one sentence. So, quick example of that many of you might know this story, that Lego a few years ago, their sales were plateauing. They did a major project asking kids and parents what it is they wanted in Lego products, and they established through that the key thing where they'd gone slightly wrong is that they actually hadn't fully grasped the importance of dominating the concept of play. And once they grasped that, once they reclaimed the space about what is play, that led to the creation of the Lego movie and so on. And so you could say a massive amount of research with loads of focus groups and surveys and all the rest of it, it could be reduced down to it's all about play. It's all about the phenomenon of play. And that is summing up a complex project in just a short sentence. Next tool, the structure tool. And this is really sort of building on what Holly was saying about the importance of how stories work. So in our toolkit, we've got different story structures and templates that you can actually refer to help you create the architecture of a story. Now, one structure, and this has already been alluded to, is the classic linear structure, which Steve Jobs made famous, where you start with a challenge, which could be Big Blue, IBM, boring, what are we going to do about that? Followed by the solution, which at the beginning for Steve Jobs was the Apple I desktop and then the Apple Mac and so on. And then everything coming through to an action. So it's a simple structure, but there is a structure there. A lot of presentations fail because this hasn't been thought through. And there are other structures. A lot of you will know about the situation, complexity, resolution structure. The point being, there's no necessarily one right structure, but you need to have one. Another structure in the tool bag is the nonlinear structure. This is coming at storytelling in a totally different way. you're taking, let's say, a high-level concept, for example, like what is entrepreneurialism, and you'll have like a mind map where you can take that as your central part of the story and then branch out to deal with different facets and aspects of entrepreneurism. So a couple of examples there, but there are a number of different structures in the toolbag. Now these can be supported with substructures, and I've just given you one illustration there of a substructure. We call it in the trade here, the time machine. What would the world look like in 2020 if we followed this course of action? Other quick examples of substructures would be the parallel universe. If we pursued route A, what would the world look like in the future? If we pursued route B, what would actually happen? And there's the deep dive substructure, where you take one element of the issue you're looking at and look at it in very close detail. So substructures sit within your structure and give it that elegance to the point you're trying to get over. So on to the next tool, the narrative tool, which is all about developing a theme for your presentation and using powerful words that support that theme. There's a number of themes. There's probably a finite number of themes. There's opportunity, challenge, quest, the great dream. So we've mapped out in the tool bag more or less all the themes that sort of characterize most Hollywood films and novels, and provided illustrations of the words you need to reinforce that particular theme. Now I put a picture of Martin Luther King there because if you YouTube him giving a speech, you can see how he made the use of theme and structure. So he'd always start with a challenge, black people in America are not being treated fairly. Then he moves to a solution, the civil rights movement. Then he calls for action. But throughout, he had a theme which was characterized with his very powerful, I have a dream. And he kept returning to that as a kind of chorus to his speeches. So theme is important. And detail is critical, isn't it, in terms of telling stories? Here I'll give you the illustration of Pearl Harbor, which some may know this, that the original script for the Roosevelt speech read December the 7th, 1941, a date that will live in world history. That's what Roosevelt received from the civil servants or the script writers. But you can see in his own handwriting, he crosses out world history and writes in the word infamy. And so that totally transforms the whole power and impact of the speech. We all remember December the 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. So attention to detail over words with the theme is absolutely crucial. So impact tool. Now this tool is really about bringing the presentation alive, making it stand out. It's trying to build on the points that Lucy was making earlier. It's about having kind of tips and tricks in the tool bag to make sure you grab attention at the beginning of the presentation, and in the middle of a presentation, if energy is waning a bit, to provide what we call in the trade lean in, to get people to come back in and pay attention, and to leave them with a message that they want to share. So lots of different techniques in the tool bag. One I use quite frequently, I call this a hero's tale, is to switch from the aggregate big canvas of data and switch it back to tell the story through the individual lens. Now, this has been the go-to style for Hollywood for years. So Spielberg wouldn't tell the whole story of D-Day over a massive great canvas. He tells it through the lens of Saving Private Ryan. And we can see that now with the news broadcasts. I mean, in the old days, in the UK, we had the Pathy newsreel, which would be a very official account of things. Now you have the story told of an event through the eyes of, say, a mother of a soldier that was injured in some conflict or the other. So it's telling it through the lens of the individual. And another example of a kind of impact tool would be personal storytelling episodes, which I've tried to do here. You'll see as I've gone through, I've tried to give a little example of a study I gave here, or offered a personal view on something. So you've got these different techniques in the tool bag in order to create impact for your presentation. And it's part of the impact tool that you'd pick up on some of the excellent points that were made earlier about visual impact and using visuals to get over the presentation. So at the end of the Story Builder framework, it's sort of bringing all those things together. You go into storytelling with a clear idea of audience expectations. You know absolutely what change you seek in the audience by giving this presentation. The evidence is pinned down, tailored to that audience. You're going for that top 20% of evidence. You can repeat back, if pushed, your presentation in one sentence. You've got a clear-cut theme with keywords to support it. At the heart of it is a structure, it could be a linear, non-linear structure, supported with substructures that drive the story forward. And you've paid attention you've got an impact tool that helps you grab attention at the beginning, get engagement, and leave people with an ending, something they want to actually share. So the point of this is to try and make story building and telling accessible to people that may not feel they were kind of natural storytellers. So just to say that I focused here on on the chart there. I've just got a book coming out, High Performance Customer Insight Professional. The point I'm making there is there are three elements to it. There's the sense-making part, which is sorting out the evidence. There's the story builder part, which we've spoken about here, and there's a kind of influence or follow-up, which is how you make sure insights are actioned. If you want to know about any of that stuff, just send me a email, and I can send you some more information. So. That's all I have to say. That's all I've got time for in 15 minutes. Hopefully, you've got a sense of how to structure a evidence-based story.
Thank you, David. Great stuff. And I should just add, one of the key books that I refer to when I do work in this area is The Art and the Science of Interpreting Market Research Evidence, written by David, who's just talked about it, back in 2004, so he was way ahead of the field. It reminds me of that soccer player, was he from Chelsea, who was always well ahead of his time, David?
You're too young to remember. It was actually Martin Peters.
Martin Peters, that's the one.
10
years ahead of his time.
To say that, but yes, what I think what in that original book, it's really about trying to introduce the idea of holistic storytelling. In other words, getting away from just the statistical analysis of data, that's important, but to talk about how we looked at data in terms of data having weight, power, direction. These are holistic concepts, and that's the kind of allows you to move into storytelling. If you've got an integrated evidence, you're more likely to be a good storyteller. So I've really just, with the latest stuff, I've just picked up on that early book. So thank you very much for the plug there.
And I look forward to reading the new one.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we've got here is, you talked about the importance of finding out the real business question. What are people going to do next? You wish that you had known they were thinking of buying this company, in your example. How do you find out what the real business question is, particularly if the insight manager doesn't know?
Yeah, I mean, in that toolkit, what I've got is I've got a bunch of questions to ask stakeholders and a bunch of questions to ask yourself. It's a combination of asking these questions, of saying, what is the ultimate way this data is going to be used, and I think it's just a process of asking that of your immediate contact, and then coming back and sort of reflecting on things. Is that it? Agonize about it. If you feel right, I can go into this project now knowing what this is all about. But if you've got any kind of nagging doubts, I think you've got to go back and get a take two. And you don't want to be kind of hassle people, but I think it is worth just putting the time in there. It's easy to say, not invented here, that's someone's responsibility. So I was at fault there. I should have worked harder not to walk into that situation I was in. It was down to me. I should have gone back. I should have been more tenacious, more persistent. I should have tried different methods, the phone, the email, if I had any nagging doubts that I hadn't really got to the heart of what this is all about. So short answer, really, tenacity, persistence, and using a range of different question styles and techniques to keep nebbing away at it until you feel you really understand it.
We're all going to buy your book, but where else can people find out about these structures? I think there was a couple of people highlighting when you're working through the different story structures. Where would be a good starting place?
Yeah, they tend to be, like I mentioned there, like the situation complexity resolution structure, and that's not original to me. I think that's sort of Barber and Minto. I think that's out of McKinsey's, so that's a kind of go-to McKinsey structure. As I say, if you look at the stuff about how to present like Steve Jobs, you'll learn about that style that I referred to there. So I haven't got a kind. I think it's just, I don't know, say the oldies sort of to go to the book. It's a bit mean-spirited. So I learned about these things by going to a number of different places. I didn't have a one-stop place to go to for structures, but I'm happy to, as I say, there's a couple of sources there. That's an interesting book, How to Present Like Steve Jobs. There's if you Google McKinsey's and how their structures work, and you've got other structures like the knowledge pyramid, which is a style that newspaper journalists use, where you have one sort of, it's all pivots around one killer headline stat, then you have one other supporting stat, and then a third lower level stat, and you put the whole story around that 3-tier thing. So you learn about that by looking at the way newspaper editors construct headlines. So I sort of answered that, but I haven't got a nice simple one source go-to place.
Yeah, I think the point about McKinsey is well made. I think for 90% or more of market researchers, if we told stories as well as McKinsey do, we would be doing very well. Maybe a handful of people are saying, well, I've moved on beyond there. But I think for the rest of us, it would be good to get there. So looking at their stuff, which is very templated, there's a lot of theory and there's a lot of practice together.
And also, Ray, it's interesting. We've sometimes done projects for McKinsey's, and then we look at the final output. So we've done a detailed project with a full presentation, and then we look at the final presentation they give to their end client. And what they're good at is they're good at being absolutely ruthless at cutting out any information that doesn't drive the story. And I'm thinking, oh, well, what about those 6 focus groups I did in Scotland? If they're not actually contributing to the storyline, they leave it out. And that takes us back to the basic principles of telling a good story, that a novelist only includes information in there if it's driving the way stories work. Is it helping us understand the characters and the choices they've got to make? If not, leave it out. So more so with drama, more so with poetry. The more it becomes reduced down to the essence, the more you're forced only to provide information that drives the central story. So I agree with you. They're a good source.
Super. Okay. And we've got someone there tweeting a copy of your book on Twitter, so you can look at that later. Thank you so much, David. That's been really useful.
Okay, thanks, Ray.